Our dear esteemed viewers, welcome back to our talk show. We are continuing with our guest tonight, Mr. Francis Chisirinya. He has served in the private sector, he's still serving the Private Sector Foundation, and he's the Chief Membership Officer. He also was the former Deputy Executive Director. I was sharing with him in our short break, I say he's supposed to be, speaking with every other time, even we give you a forum, sir, for the voiceless. More of our citizens are in this class, are in this category of the private sector. That is my simple interpretation. As referring to what you were sharing with us in the last few minutes, especially comparing with our population and those who are engaged in the formal, informal jobs, the formal jobs and the civil service. Our topical discussion is private sector's investments and economic growth. We continue to ask ourselves, and together as we join together in this discussion, our dear viewers, whether the private sector initiatives is private sector initiatives a solution to unemployment and export deficit. Our dear guest, we get concerned, this television, our philosophy, we continue to call for economic transformation, mindset change, share information, and we do even teach and bring enlightenment to our society for transformation indeed. But one of the challenges that we continue to face that we want to address together through part of such talk shows, we continue to face one of it, which is unemployment, and export deficit is part of the unresolved question. And yet, we appreciate that private sector, which has been an economic reform in the by the NRM, because we are still with the NRM. I was about to say the post-NRM, please, they may say that, when are you ending our NRM? The NRM government. And it ended the post-economic crisis, that's what I wanted to refer to. The post-economic crisis, which was created by Idi Amin, by the chasing away of the Asians. Of course, expelling Asians from the economy wasn't the best decision, as most of the economic commentators have stated. But yet we also look at, even if the private sector investment, private sector has been supported by the NRM government, but we still lack a lot to be done in order to be a world economy. You talked about 38 billion, our dear guest, but I want to provoke you that our neighboring country, which is also not the best as far as the global economies are concerned, Kenya, they are at 124 billion USA dollars, and for us we're at 38. Yeah. So we have a lot to do. We go to Nigeria, it is at 424 billion USA dollars. When we go to, I don't want to talk about those first world countries. Can you come on again and share with us what you had packaged for this evening as we continue through this discourse?
I thank you, Mr. Moderator. Mm-hmm. I think if anybody doubts at all that it is the private sector that will change the fortunes of this country, mm-hmm. you have to go back to where we were before 1986, where in effect we had a lot of government in doing business. You had government trading in this, government trading in that, government and trading with the private sector and disorganizing them. In fact, those governments used to have what they used to call even the minister of supplies. To supply goods, to allocate cheats for people to go and buy beer, to go and get salt, to go. So what the minister was actually doing and what the policy did was to supply shortages of everything. So the policy which involves government in business is a disaster, and it will always be a failure. So now when this reform came and the government decided that it will run a liberalized economy where the private sector competes for opportunities, it did take a long time. The shortages disappeared, shortages of fuel, shortage of salt, shortage of sugar, bread, all of that, the private sector came in and covered the gap. So there is no doubt at all that it is the private sector that can change the fortunes of any country. And we see it, all countries that are private sector led, the ones that they call capitalists, their societies, their citizens are doing very well.
Mr. First, we'll go step by step. You've mentioned where private sector, has become a solution. The challenges, especially when you talk about addressing the shortages of bread, shortages of salt, and of recent, the good thing you come at a time when you have these questions for you, especially at a moment where there is an outcry that there is a global economic crisis, and one of it is that we are importing wheat. We are importing wheat to be the one to be, which is being utilized by those who are in that, bakery, manufacturing kind of, those factories. And we ask ourselves, in a midst when such crisis come, and where our, the prices of commodities, they have, skyrocketed so highly that everyone is saying, you dig deep. The other day, when I was going to buy a soap, and I went to the supermarket, and the cost is at 8,000, and we used to buy it at 4,000 times 2. Should we say the private sector is helping us in that way?
Yes, it is helping you. And let me also again say this, that for the private sector, why is it able to do this? The first thing that you have this huge motivation that drives the private sector, the motivation of making a profit, because it is that profit that is going to help you meet your needs as a business. It will help you grow. It is the one that will make you wealthy and rich. So because the private sector has that drive to make a profit, and the profit is made from having your incomes higher than your expenses. So you really have, as the private sector, you need to be innovative. You need to look at ways through which you can put your goods on the market at the cheapest cost. Because if you don't, somebody else is going to put your goods at a cheaper cost and outcompete you. You've got to look out for capital and invest that capital so that it makes money for you. You got to deal with competition. You have to be on your feet quick in making decisions, because nobody is going to wait. The market is not going to wait for you because you're still dreaming about a decision on price, a decision on where to source the goods, and decision where to sell more. And because of the efficiencies, because of that system that brings those efficiencies, so the private sector is always going to perform, and is going to always deliver the goods and the services.
Let me ask you a question. Who is the private sector? And number two, what has the government done in balance, not in imbalance, to support the foreign investors who are under the category of private sector and the local investors?
So the private sector, as I explained, is anybody, any business which is not owned or controlled by government. It is the businesses that are owned by the private people.
Even if I have a shop, it's private.
It's private.
Even if I have a shop of like the capital of 1 million.
Whatever, whether it has 50,000 shillings is your capital, like the many ladies we see on the streets, the ones who sell mangoes and fruits and the rest of the things. They are private sector.
That's right.
They are private sector, and I can tell you, they have found a mechanism of being efficient and making a return out of it. Otherwise, they wouldn't be returning. They can't be there if they're not picking anything from there to pay for their expenses. So that is the beauty of the private sector that we have. So now, for the private sector to thrive and give you all of that I've explained, it must operate in an environment that enables it to thrive. Unfortunately, the private sector does not control government. No.
It does not control government.
It doesn't control the laws that are made. It doesn't control all of those things that are public, the things that we share together. Okay? It is government that control, but to succeed the government must provide that particular environment.
There's something which you maintain the flow, but there's something which I want us to help the viewers maybe understand. Does the government control the private sector? Because the reason why I ask you that question, it is premised on the recent occurrences in the economy. You talk about Bidco, you talk about another company, those who are engaged in Mukwano, they just come and say, for us our prices, we'll sell soap at 10,000 shillings. And the government, whether they are in agreement with the government, because they said, why is the government not restricting the private sector not to do exploitation of the citizens, especially those who are in business? Two, we go to hospitals, those who are doing also private sector in service delivery in hospitals. Hospital, you go in one of the hospital matches, you are the one to select which hospital to go to, but you find you just step at case hospital, come to the hospital, just within a few minutes, as you have done the diagnosis, 200,000. And it looks to be the government is watching. These people come in here and ask us high prices. Schools. You go to a secondary school, some secondary schools here, there are those which are referred as so-called, I use so-called because I'm not taking care of my children, 6 million a term. Even if you may be having the bursary class, but is that a fair price? Leaving that aside, you remember the controversy some few days ago when there was a quarrel, a bit of a disagreement, as the Minister of Education tried to regulate the school fees. Say no, used to say no, we also have to set our prices. Kindly intervene in this unresolved question.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think the primary principle in a liberalized economy and the one that can help the private sector to give you those services that you require and you don't have shortages is because the price is set by what we call demand and supply. So there is demand on one side, those who want certain things, and there is supply on one side, those who produce to sell, to provide the services. Now, the interaction of the two produces a price at which the goods must be sold. And I can tell you, that particular price is actually the right price, and is the closest that you can have to a fair price for everybody who is operating. Otherwise, if you would like to interfere with that, what you do is you bring in subsidies and you give them to either the buyers so that they can afford this price, or you give the subsidy to the supplier so that they can reduce the price. So what point am I talking about in the broader scheme of things? Now, in the broader scheme of things, the private sector, as I said, does not control the public thing, the public services.
Yes.
So for the private sector to operate, succeed, and give you the goods you need at the fair prices that you want, the government must do certain things. One of them is what we call regulation.
That's right.
Regulation is the actions by government to put certain actions that moderate and help the private sector not to go overboard. To ask them questions that can keep on guiding them and keep them on the objective of providing goods and services at the fairest price that there is. It is not control. So government should not attempt to control the private sector. If it does, then that will create a problem. The private sector will fail. But what government does is to have regulation. That is why in Uganda, many of you, when you hear the word authority or commission, those are regulatory agencies. Electricity Regulatory Authority, it is to regulate the players in the electricity sector. Communications Commission to regulate the players in the communication sector. Uganda bankers to regulate the players, the Bank of Uganda to regulate the players in the financial sector, but not to control them, to regulate them. Now, after government has appreciated that role, we expect it to be playing it professionally.
May you give us more light about the paradox of regulation and control? Because as you were sharing with us, if I can put a regulation as you entered into this, show, I say, no putting on a tie, and it's a regulation for us as March 2040. I'm giving you an example. You will not put on the tie. And if you are not put on a tie, that means I have controlled you. So the two, they are inseparable. Do you have something different from that? And because of that, that's why at the end of the day, we are not in our economy, which I could have referred as a free market economy, where the government indeed comes to regulate, and the invisible hand, we normally call it an invisible hand of the government, according to Michael Porter of 1993, in his articulation about the economics of the world. And the invisible hand, if it does not intervene, our people outside there, including myself, we are going to suffer at the expense of those who have, and their two classes will emerge, and still that will affect economic growth. How can we bridge that gap?
Yes, the difference between control and regulation is this, that if you are controlling, you really use power, authority to control. Tomorrow, the price of fuel will be this. Or you will not sell fuel beyond 8 in the morning. That is control. But regulation is, you look at all the circumstances surrounding the industry. Sit down with the industry actors and players. Look at an issue. Then agree together what kind of regulation can regulate them, smoothing out some of the challenges that can actually be unfair, either to the players themselves or to the users of those goods and services. That is what they call regulation. Like, for instance, we can say, or we say, all goods must meet a particular standard, and you prescribe what that standard is. Now, that standard, you agree with it, you agree on it with the actors for the following reasons. One, you would like to have people who use it to protect their health. So if you are going to protect the health of your users, there are things that you put in the standard that must be done. For instance, if it is something that is to be eaten, you say you manufacture this product in this kind of a room. It will have terrazzo, it will have tiles, it will have flowing water. The people who are working there must be medically examined every so often, so that if they have any ailments, they don't pass it into the product. Then you will, these are the contents, this is the mixes that you make, so that you don't make it, for instance, if you're using sugar, too sweet to affect the health of the people. So you create that standard. Then this is how you will label the product, so that now that standard is what is, for me, if I'm a consumer, I know that the product meets the standard. If I see this kind of mark, I have the confidence. But also to the players, the people who manufacture, who operate, who produce those particular goods, they know a particular standard, and everybody is doing the same. They are all doing the same ingredients, they are all making the same mixes, they are doing the same labeling. There you are regulating. Everybody is operating at the same, on a fair ground for everybody. There you are regulating. But control is different, because Control, you can say one of the companies do this, the other one do the other. The one you will sell here, you won't sell there. That kind of thing is not what enables the private sector to thrive. So as I said, government must ensure that they must be able to be, if you are in a liberalized environment like we are in, an open market, you must be able to regulate. Now, the challenges come where there is failure in regulation or regulation is insufficient. This is when now you are going to start having cries, hearing, oh, we are being overcharged because the prices of a particular product or a particular service is out of this world. You can imagine, this person buys that product at a certain amount of money and sells at many times, multiples, so they are making abnormal profits. That is a failure in regulation. And what do you do for that?
That's what we are facing, because the government remains folding hands. Now, like, children have gone back to school, and we will acknowledge it is true the number of situations that we have faced, but the situation, especially of the crisis, talk about fuel and so forth. But the government, as we talk about that, we have the Minister of Trade, we have the Minister of Education, and they know whatever is happening, there is research. I could believe that the two needs to match together, especially where the regulation and control for the sake of the citizens not to be exploited is important. Kindly let us go for the short break. We'll come back with the in-depth discussion into this matter of ensuring the private sector should fight for our citizens also who are in the private sector so that they are not exploited. Stay tuned to Smart 24 TV. You cannot miss this. See you in the session.